My God, how can this be happening now? Mr. Harrison Caldwell roared into the phone, his voice vibrating through the polished marble hallways of the 70th floor of Caldwell Innovations. The tech magnate paced his expansive glass office, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as the Brazilian delegation stepped out of 3 sleek black cars at the entrance. The official translator had just called to cancel a sudden family emergency that couldn't wait. In mere minutes, executives from Brazil's largest telecommunications firm would be sitting in the opulent conference room, ready to finalize a $150 million contract. $150 million that hinged entirely on flawless communication. Mr. Caldwell, I've tried every translator in Boston, sighed Miss Brianna Davies, his executive assistant, her phone still glued to her ear. No one is available for a meeting of this magnitude on such short notice. Harrison loosened his silk tie, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. 25 years building Caldwell Innovations, and it could all come crashing down because of a language barrier. The Brazilians were known for their strict communication protocols. They would never tolerate a meeting conducted through translation apps or improvised gestures. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible voice echoed from the corner of the room. "Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell, but I speak fluent Portuguese." All eyes turned to Kai Jackson, 29, who had paused his cleaning routine, a dustcloth still in his gloved hand. He wore the standard gray uniform of the maintenance staff. Kai, a black man, had been working on the executive floors for 4 years, always discreet, always efficient, always invisible to the power players who circulated there. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the distant hum of the city. Brianna was the first to react, letting out a nervous, disbelieving laugh. "Kai, this isn't a joke. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar international deal." Harrison studied him for a moment, as if truly seeing him for the very first time. "You speak Portuguese?" he asked, his voice heavy with skepticism, yet tinged with a desperate hope. "Portuguese, Spanish, and a little French," Kai replied calmly, meeting Harrison's gaze without flinching. "I studied Latin American linguistics at Harvard before I started working here." Kai, at 29, had never imagined that 4 years cleaning these executive offices would prepare him for a moment like this. But all that time, while wiping down conference tables, he had listened to every conversation, absorbed every strategy, watched every move these executives made, especially Brianna. Brianna's expression quickly morphed from amusement to irritation. "Harrison, you can't be serious. A cleaning man conducting the most important meeting of the year?" But Harrison was desperate. There was something about Kai's posture, the quiet confidence in his voice, that made him hesitate. "Prove it," he said abruptly. "Say something in Portuguese." Kai took a deep breath and began to speak in perfect, resonant Portuguese. "É uma honra conhecer-los aqui e esperamos que nossa cooperação traga resultados mutuamente benéficos." Harrison was speechless. Though he didn't understand a word, he could sense the natural fluency, confidence, and authority in his voice. "What did you say?" he asked, still processing the impossible. "That it's an honor to meet you here, and we hope our cooperation will bring mutually beneficial results," Kai translated. "It's a very respectful standard business greeting in Brazilian culture." Brianna crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable. "Harrison, think about this. What will the Brazilians think when they see you brought a cleaning man to an executive meeting?" At that moment, a memory flashed through Kai's mind. 6 months ago, he had found Brianna in the executive washroom, crying on the phone, talking to someone about that young black man who's always lurking around important meetings. At the time, Kai had pretended not to hear, but he had remembered every word. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Harrison watched Kai. There was something in his eyes, a deep intelligence, a quiet dignity that starkly contrasted with the way everyone treated him daily. For 4 years he had cleaned these rooms, listened to these conversations, absorbed more about the company's workings than many executives. "You have 20 minutes to get yourself together," Harrison finally said, ignoring Brianna's shocked glare. "Put on something appropriate and meet me in the conference room." As Kai hurried out, Brianna whispered furiously, "You've completely lost your mind. When this backfires, it will be the end of your career." But Harrison wasn't listening. For the first time in years, he was about to discover that the most valuable people are sometimes the ones who go unnoticed right under your nose. What none of them knew was that Kai had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone could have imagined. And Brianna, with all her arrogance and thinly veiled prejudice, was about to discover that underestimating someone based on appearances can be the biggest mistake a person can make. 20 minutes later, when Kai returned to the conference room, the silence was immediate and awkward. He had changed out of his uniform and into a crisp black suit borrowed from the receptionist's emergency wardrobe. Simple but impeccably tailored, his hair was neatly styled, and he carried a sleek tablet like any other executive. "Good heavens," muttered Mr. David Miller, the head of legal, barely bothering to hide his surprise. "Is that really the same person?" Brianna didn't bother to lower her voice when she whispered to her junior assistant, "You can put polish on tarnished brass, but it's still just brass underneath." The Brazilian delegation had arrived promptly, 5 impeccably dressed executives, led by the distinguished Mr. Point. Ricardo Costa waited in the elegant glass-walled room, chatting among themselves in Portuguese as they took in the panoramic view of the Boston skyline. Harrison made the formal introductions, deliberately omitting Kai's current title. "This is Kai Jackson, our international relations specialist for the Latin American market," he said, each word carefully chosen. Mr. Costa greeted Kai with a respectful nod. When Kai responded in perfect Portuguese, thanking him for the honor of their meeting and praising their punctuality, a highly valued virtue in Brazilian culture, Mr. Costa's eyes lit up with genuine surprise and approval. For the first 15 minutes, Kai translated every nuance with surgical precision. Not just the words, but the cultural tones, the diplomatic implications, even small witty proverbs that made the Brazilian delegation laugh genuinely. The meeting flowed with a naturalness that no one had expected. That was when Brianna decided to intervene. "Kai," she interrupted with a saccharine smile, "perhaps we should explain to our esteemed guests your unique career path at the company." Harrison shot her a warning glance, but Brianna continued, "It's just so inspiring to see someone reinventing themselves like that, moving up in life, so to speak." The condescending tone was unmistakable. Kai felt a familiar weight of humiliation. That feeling he had known since he was 19, when he had to drop out of Harvard in the middle of his second year because his ailing father had lost his job and needed someone to care for him and pay mounting medical bills. "Life teaches us that opportunities can come in unexpected ways," Kai replied calmly, keeping his dignity intact as Mr. Costa watched the exchange with growing confusion. But really, who would have thought that someone who was cleaning these very rooms 4 years ago would be sitting at this table today? Brianna paused, letting the information sink in for the Brazilian delegates. "It truly demonstrates how our company values diversity in all its forms." The silence that followed was devastating. Kai saw Mr. Costa's expression change subtly, not exactly contempt, but an uncomfortable surprise that made Kai's stomach tighten. In Brazilian culture, professional hierarchies were taken very seriously. Harrison quickly interjected, "What Brianna meant is that we value talent wherever we find it." But the damage was done. For the next 15 minutes, Kai felt the Brazilian executives' glances shift. They were still polite, still translating when necessary, but the ease was gone. He had become a curiosity, not a professional. It was at that moment that something inside him crystallized. For 4 years, he had cleaned these rooms while executives discussed strategies, closed deals, and made decisions worth millions. He had absorbed every word, every tactic, every mistake they made, especially Brianna's mistakes, like the time Brianna subtly altered quarterly sales figures to impress a client, or when she took credit for a project entirely developed by a subordinate who was later made redundant, or when she used confidential information for her own personal stock negotiations. Kai had seen everything, heard everything, and, more importantly, he had kept everything. The meeting ended with a tentative preliminary agreement. The Brazilians promised to carefully consider the proposal diplomatic code for, maybe, if we don't find something better. When the delegation left, Brianna couldn't hide her satisfaction. Well, that was interesting, she said, arranging her papers with exaggerated movements. Perhaps next time we should be more transparent about our team's qualifications from the outset. Harrison was visibly furious, but before he could respond, Kai rose calmly. "Brianna," he said, his voice soft but laden with a new authority. "Mr. Costa mentioned something interesting before he left." Brianna raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Like what?" "He said he was impressed with my fluency, but confused by the hierarchical dynamics of the meeting." Kai paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "He asked if I could call him later to clarify some cultural aspects of our presentation." Brianna's expression subtly changed. What aspects, mainly? Why wasn't the person responsible for translation introduced as the lead negotiator, considering that in their culture, whoever speaks the language automatically assumes the position of authority? Kai smiled softly. "He said he'd like to better understand our organizational structure before making a final decision." Brianna's face paled slightly as she processed the implications. For 4 years, Kai had been invisible. But invisibility, she was about to discover, can be the most powerful weapon of all, especially when you've been watching, learning, and preparing for the right moment to step out of the shadows. What Brianna didn't know was that every insult, every humiliation, every attempt at sabotage was only fueling something far more dangerous than simple resentment. It was creating a strategist who knew every weakness, every secret, every lie that circulated through those corridors of power. 2 hours after the disastrous meeting, Kai was back in his gray uniform, pushing his cart through the executive hallways, but this time, every move was calculated. For 4 years, he had mentally mapped every important conversation, every whispered secret, every document left carelessly on desks, especially Brianna's. "Look who's back where he belongs," Brianna commented loudly enough for all the executives in the hallway to hear as she chatted with Miss Olivia Smith from accounting. "After that pathetic charade today, at least we know where everyone really belongs." Kai continued cleaning, but his hands moved automatically as his mind registered every word. Brianna had no idea that during those 4 years, while cleaning her office, Kai had seen personal emails left open, phone conversations about contract manipulation, and, most importantly, those documents Brianna hid in her bottom drawer, documents about unfair competition against smaller, minority-owned businesses. "You know what bothers me the most?" Brianna continued, clearly showing off to Olivia. "Harrison actually thought that a cleaning man could save a $150 million deal, as if 4 years cleaning washrooms qualified him to sit at the table with real executives." It was at that moment that Kai's phone vibrated discreetly, a message from an unknown number, but in Portuguese characters he recognized immediately. It was from Mr. Costa. "Mr. Jackson, I would like to talk to you privately about our company and your future opportunities. Could we meet tomorrow at 10 a.m.? The message continued, "At the Rio Grill restaurant on Newberry Street. I have a proposal that may interest you." Kai's heart raced. This wasn't just about translation. It was about so much more. During the meeting, he had realized that Mr. Costa was evaluating not only his linguistic fluency, but also his business acumen, his poise, and his dignity under pressure. That night in his small Cambridge apartment, Kai opened a file on his computer that he had been building for 3 years. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Every company has its dirty secrets, and 4 years invisible in the corridors of power had given him access to information that could rock foundations. The file, titled Caldwell Innovations Irregularities, contained 72 pages of meticulously collected evidence, printed emails Brianna thought she had deleted, call logs recorded by the security system when she worked on weekends, and, most importantly, photos of documents proving how Brianna had deliberately sabotaged 4 contracts with companies run by Black-owned businesses in the last 24 months. Kai had seen Brianna lie to clients, take credit for projects developed by others, and, most importantly, use her position to block promotions for employees she considered inappropriate for the company's image. The next day, at 10 sharp, Kai arrived at Rio Grill restaurant, wearing a simple but elegant suit he had bought with his first college savings. Mr. Costa was already waiting, accompanied by an elegant woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Isabel Vargas, the group's vice president of international development. Mr. Jackson, Mr. Costa began in English but then switched naturally to Portuguese. Yesterday, I observed not only your linguistic fluency, but something much more valuable, your composure under undue pressure. Mrs. Vargas leaned forward. Our company is expanding operations in North America. We need someone who understands both Brazilian culture and American business dynamics, someone who has observed how business really works from the inside. And someone, Mr. Costa added with a knowing smile, who has the dignity not to bow down to small people in big positions. For 2 hours, Kai spoke fluently about market strategies, cultural differences in negotiations, and especially how American companies often underestimated the sophistication of Latin American investors. He subtly mentioned a few irregularities he had observed at competing companies without naming names. When Mrs. Vargas slid a business card across the table, Kai read, Jackson, Associates International Consulting. On the card, a staggering annual salary was listed, 5 times what he earned at Caldwell Innovations. Consider our offer, said Mr. Costa. He stood up. But we have one specific condition. We'd like you to start by helping us investigate certain discrepancies we've discovered in Caldwell Innovations contracts. Apparently, there is evidence of questionable practices that violate federal international trade regulations. Kai held the card with steady hands. For 4 years, he had been treated like furniture. Now, 2 of Brazil's most brilliant business minds were offering him not just a job, but a strategic alliance. There's an emergency meeting at Caldwell Innovations tomorrow, Mrs. Vargas said quietly. We've learned that the Brazilian delegation has filed a formal complaint about contract irregularities. It might be worth your while to attend. That night, Kai called his father. Dad, remember how you always said that patience is a smart man's most powerful weapon? Of course, son, why? I think I finally understand what you meant. As he hung up the phone, Kai looked out his apartment window at the Boston skyline. Tomorrow, Brianna and all of Caldwell Innovations would discover that 4 years of invisibility had created something far more dangerous than a resentful employee. They had forged a strategist who knew every weakness, every lie, every secret of that company. And unlike the executives who underestimated people based on appearances, Kai had learned that true strength comes from observing, planning, and acting at the exact moment when his opponents least expect it. The next morning, the executive boardroom at Caldwell Innovations was buzzing with palpable tension. Harrison had called an emergency meeting with the entire board after receiving an official report from the Brazilian delegation about serious contractual irregularities that could result in a federal investigation. Brianna entered confidently, her vibrant red suit and high heels echoing authority through the hallways. She had spent the night preparing her defense, convinced she could pin all the blame on the incompetent cleaning man Harrison had brought to the meeting. Well, Brianna began, addressing the 7 board members, I imagine we're here to discuss yesterday's fiasco. As I warned, putting an unqualified employee in a negotiation of this magnitude was a reckless decision that is now costing the company $150 million. That was when the door opened silently. Kai entered wearing an impeccable charcoal gray ensemble, not borrowed, but purchased the night before with the advance the Brazilian company had given him. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and a laptop, moving with the confidence of someone who had finally found his place. I'm sorry I'm late, Kai said calmly, taking a seat next to Harrison. I was finishing up some important information for the meeting. Brianna's face twisted in ill-concealed irritation. With all due respect, Harrison, I don't understand why he's here. This is an executive meeting. He's here, Harrison replied coldly, because the Brazilian delegation specifically requested his presence to clarify the accusations they made. Kai opened his laptop with calculated movements. Mr. Costa approached me yesterday afternoon with some specific concerns about Caldwell Innovations' contracting practices. Apparently, they had discovered evidence of bid rigging and sabotage against competing companies. That's ridiculous, Brianna exploded, her tone rising an octave. What kind of evidence could a cleaning man have about executive operations? The smile that crossed Kai's face was soft but devastating. The kind of evidence you gather when you're invisible for 4 years and people talk in front of you as if you don't exist. Brianna's expression changed subtly, the first spark of real fear crossing her eyes. Kai connected his laptop to the projector. The first image that appeared was an internal email from Brianna to a client dated 7 months ago. This email, sent to Sterling Corp., contains confidential information about the Nexus Group's proposals, our direct competitor at the time. The silence in the room was deafening. Brianna tried to interrupt, but Kai continued relentlessly. This second document shows how Brianna deliberately inflated the costs of projects led by Black and Hispanic employees, forcing cancellations that she then attributed to the incompetence of those responsible. The screen displayed spreadsheets with obvious alterations, internal emails, and security system recordings. For 4 years, Kai had meticulously documented every irregularity. "This is a setup," Brianna shouted, jumping to her feet. "He's fabricating evidence to get revenge because I exposed his true position in the company." Kai remained calmly seated. "Mr. Caldwell, the recording I'm about to play was made by the company's own security system 9 months ago." Brianna's voice echoed through the room's speakers. "We can't allow these types of people to think they belong in executive meeting rooms. It's a matter of maintaining appropriate standards in the company." Brianna's face turned pale instantly. She remembered that conversation, a private discussion with Miller about keeping the company free of unsuitable elements. "And this," Kai continued, displaying a new recording, "is from 3 weeks ago when Brianna deliberately instructed the receptionist to lose resumes from candidates with names that sounded too ethnic. One of the directors, Miss Lena Washington, a distinguished Black woman who had been with the company for 18 years, leaned forward with a grim expression. "Brianna, is this true?" That's out of context," Brianna stammered, sweat beginning to form small beads on her forehead. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under to maintain company standards." "Company standards," Kai said softly, "include ethics, integrity, and compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws, all of which have been systematically violated over the last 24 months. Harrison turned to Brianna, his expression stony. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you shouldn't be fired for cause and reported to the district attorney." Brianna looked desperately around the table, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face. She found only looks of disapproval and disgust. "You're making a terrible mistake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's just a resentful cleaning man who—" "He," Harrison interrupted authoritatively, "is our new director of international relations, and you're fired." The silence that followed was absolute. Brianna remained standing, swaying slightly, processing that her 17-year career had ended in a matter of minutes. "Your access credentials will be revoked immediately," Harrison continued. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." "And Brianna," he paused, "considering the seriousness of the evidence presented, we will be forwarding everything to the relevant authorities." As security escorted Brianna out, she shot Kai one last venomous look. "You may have won today, but that doesn't change what you really are." Kai met her gaze with unflinching calm. "You're right. I am exactly what I've always been, someone who watches, learns, and acts at the right moment. The difference is that now, finally, I'm where I've always belonged." 3 hours later, when the meeting ended with Kai officially named to his new position, Harrison called him aside. "How did you pull this off? 4 years of evidence, recordings, documents?" Kai smiled for the first time in days. "When you're treated like furniture, people forget that furniture has eyes and ears." Brianna underestimated the power of invisibility and overestimated the value of her own arrogance. At that moment, as he looked out at his new office overlooking Boston, Kai realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying Brianna, but building something greater than she could ever imagine. The future that awaited him would be written by his own hand, and this time, no one could erase his signature. 6 months later, Kai Jackson sat in his new office on the 45th floor of Caldwell Innovations, reviewing the contracts he had signed with Latin American companies. His sleek glass desk was covered with documents in Portuguese, Spanish, and English, negotiations that had already yielded $300 million in new contracts for the company. "Kai, the Mexican delegation has arrived," announced Miss Sophia Caldwell, Harrison's niece, who now worked as Kai's personal assistant. "They are eager to meet the man who doubled our business in Latin America in just 6 months." Through the window, Kai could see the city he had once observed only as an invisible cleaning man. Now, as Director of International Relations, he had become one of Boston's most respected executives. His annual salary of $250,000 had allowed his father to receive the best medical treatment, and he had been able to complete his master's degree through an executive program at MIT. "What about the Forbes meeting next week?" Sophia asked, consulting his busy schedule. "Confirmed," Kai replied, adjusting the navy blue blazer he wore, not out of obligation, but by choice. "They want to talk about my inclusion on the list of the country's most influential young male executives." Across town, Brianna sat in the small apartment she had rented in Dorchester after being evicted from her central Boston condo. Medical bills for psychological therapy piled up on the coffee table, along with dozens of rejection letters from companies where she had applied for jobs. The federal investigation into her discriminatory practices had resulted in a $40,000 personal fine and a 5-year ban from holding executive positions at companies with federal contracts. Her name had appeared in every major business newspaper as an example of toxic leadership, making her virtually unemployable. That morning, she had seen Kai's photo on the cover of Business World magazine, smiling confidently alongside Brazilian executives with the headline, "The translator who revolutionized international business." The irony hit her like a slap in the face. Back at Caldwell Innovations, Harrison had called a meeting with the entire board to announce the exceptional results for the semester. "Kai Jackson not only saved our deal with the Brazilians," he declared to the roomful. "He opened doors to markets we never thought possible to penetrate." Miss Lena Washington, the same black director who had witnessed Brianna's downfall, stood up to give a short speech. "In my 35 years in corporate America, I have rarely seen a transformation as dramatic as the one Kai has brought to our company. He has proven that true talent has no color, no social class, and definitely does not hide behind prejudice." The audience applauded enthusiastically as Kai remained modestly seated, remembering the man who used to clean that same boardroom just 7 months earlier. That night, in his renovated apartment on Beacon Hill, Kai received a call from his father. "Son, I saw your interview on television today. You spoke so well about second chances and perseverance." "I learned from the best," Kai replied, smiling. "You always told me that people can try to diminish us, but they can never diminish what we know and what we are capable of doing." During the television interview, Kai had been asked about Brianna and whether he felt any resentment toward her for the way she had been treated. His response had been precise and elegant. "Brianna gave me the greatest gift anyone could give. She showed me exactly who I didn't want to become. Her arrogance and prejudice taught me that true power comes from lifting others up, not stepping on them." 3 weeks later, Kai was at Harvard University, his alma mater, announcing the scholarship program he had created for low-income students who had to interrupt their studies due to financial difficulties. "No one should have to choose between taking care of their family and pursuing their dreams," he told an audience of 600 emotional students. The Second Chance Initiative program, funded in part by his own salary, had already approved 25 full scholarships for the coming semester. Brianna, watching the ceremony online in her small apartment, turned off her computer with tears in her eyes. For the first time in months, they weren't tears of self-pity, but of something that was beginning to feel like genuine regret. Meanwhile, Kai returned to the office where 4 years earlier he had pushed a cleaning cart through the same hallways. Now, young executives greeted him respectfully. Secretaries asked him for career advice, and most importantly, he had become a mentor to 6 other employees in operational departments who showed untapped potential. "You know what's most fascinating about this whole story?" Harrison asked Kai during a private conversation. "You could have used all that information about Brianna to destroy her personally, but you chose only to expose her professional misconduct." Kai smiled softly. "The best revenge is never to destroy someone. It's to build something so extraordinary that it renders everything they tried to do against you irrelevant. Kai Jackson's story proved that genuine talent, unwavering dignity, and quiet preparation can overcome any prejudice or injustice. He turned 4 years of invisibility into the greatest advantage of his career, showing that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you don't even notice watching, learning, and preparing to shine. Brianna tried to humiliate him based on prejudice and arrogance, but ended up being the architect of her own destruction. Kai taught the corporate world that true leadership does not come from titles or privileges, but from the ability to see potential where others see only limitations. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that in the end, talent and dignity always find their way to the top. No matter how many obstacles are put in their path,